This is a Dreamcast disc and is for use only on a Dreamcast unit. Playing this disc on a hi-fi or other audio equipment can cause serious damage to its speakers.
Dreamcast, up to 6 billion players.
Welcome back to the stage of history.
Why don't we play together?
Hey, it's time to make some crazy money. Are you ready? Here we go!
Please stop this disc now.
Hello and welcome to the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. Thanks for tuning in to this, our 100th episode. Well, it's actually episode 103 or 4 if you count the very special unnumbered pods we've done over the past 5 years. We're here and we have a superb show in store for you. First things first, introductions. We've got a very packed room, virtual room here today on the DreamPod. I'm one of your hosts, Tom. And today I am joined by, let me see who we've got here. We've got Andrew. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
We've got Lewis. Hello, Lewis.
Hello.
We've got James. Hello, James.
I thought you were going to leave me to last again, but yeah, hello.
We've got Mark. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
We have the ever enigmatic Mike Phelan. Hello, Mike.
Good evening, Tom.
And your chair seems to be quite quiet this evening.
I was going to say, I didn't even know Mike was on because I haven't heard his chair at all yet.
I'll make it squeak in a minute. That's the first time I've said that.
And last but not least, we are joined by our correspondent across the pond. His name is Brian. Hello, Brian.
Hey, howdy. And it's okay. I mean, at least I can be okay with that. You know, I'm not. My feelings would not be hurt. So
last but not most. Does that work? I'm not sure it does. No, we'll stick with last but not least. Okay. Now, this episode is going to be broken up into 2 parts. The second part will be about you, our listeners, and your questions, which you've either kindly recorded for us or have asked via social media. The first part, though, is slightly different as it's an interview with former SEGA of America president Peter Moore. And I will shut up in a minute and you can listen to that. But first, I just wanted to say well done to James for basically setting the interview up. And also to Peter as well for essentially finding some time in his hectic schedule to set aside 45 minutes or so to chat all things Dreamcast with us. So yeah, well done, James. Do you want to just talk a little bit about how you set that up?
I was just my normal blagging self, to be honest, mate. I just hassle people until they agree to do something, which is why sales of Spirit of Speed have gone up so dramatically in the last couple of years. But no, all jokes aside, yes, it took almost no effort whatsoever. He pretty much responded straight away to our request. And not only that, as you're about to hear in the interview coming up, he certainly didn't phone it in either. It's clearly a topic that's very passionate to him, which is exactly the reason why we wanted to get him on the Junkyard podcast. Yeah, totally. And it's almost like it was almost like a bucket list being ticked off for me that I actually managed to have some interaction with the guy, because even though he's known as the man who inverted commas killed the Dreamcast, the reasons for that we go into. It just kind of dispels a lot of myths and things. And it was quite refreshing to speak to him and just be able to ask him questions. And there was no kind of filter. He was just himself, and he was just really honest. And it was a great time. I will say that we do have the video version of the interview, up on our YouTube channel. I'm going to say this now. I was very hot, so don't make any awful comments on YouTube, please. I hope that's okay. But yeah, I'll say no more about that. Anyway, that's enough from us now. Here's the interview. We hope you enjoy it. And hope that we ask the right questions, and we'll be back with your questions and comments in around 45 minutes. Hello and welcome to the Dreamcast Junkyard DreamPod. This time we are joined by a very special guest. Welcome, Mr. Peter Moore.
Thank you, Tom. Welcome, and greetings to everybody in Dreamcast land.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for joining us to speak all things Dreamcast. Now, for the 3 people listening to this, a Dreamcast-centric podcast, who maybe don't know who you are, could you tell us who you are and how you are connected to the Dreamcast?
Well, I'm obviously Peter Moore, and I joined Sega in late 1998. I joined the video game industry in late 1998, coming out of Reebok at that time, living in Boston. Got recruited to head back to the West Coast. to join an industry I knew very little about, but had an inkling that things were about to change when it was explained to me that Sega was launching a new console that actually was online enabled, and it was going to be the first kind of non-PC that could access the internet and have interactions on the internet. And that really piqued my interest. And obviously I was aware of Sega as a dad that had bought the Sega Genesis and a few other things for my son. But from the perspective of really understanding the industry, I knew nothing. That was going to change rapidly once I accepted the job and I moved back to San Francisco from Boston. I'm originally from Liverpool. Born and bred, and I'm sure we'll have a discussion about that later in the interview. But from the perspective of, moved to America in 1980, played football, was a PE teacher in North Wales in Llangollen, and took the opportunity to take a chance on my life and career, and moved in 1980 to Long Beach, California. And I'm coming to you not far from there. I now live in Santa Barbara, California.
Wow, it's a far cry from Southampton, where I currently sit.
There's nothing wrong with Southampton. Beautiful little South Coast town.
So going back to the Dreamcast, then, can you remember the first time you actually heard the term Dreamcast and what you actually thought about that, and what kind of images did it conjure up in your mind?
Yeah, if I recall, we hadn't actually kind of nailed down the naming vernacular. And one of the things that I did, if I recall, is that certainly in Japan and maybe even Europe, it was just the Dreamcast. And I felt that there was enough cachet of the Sega name in my, and I'm talking the first 30 to 60 days of being immersed in the industry, that I felt that we needed to call it the Sega Dreamcast. I didn't think it was a good idea to eliminate Sega from the name in the same way that, yes, whilst it's now the PlayStation, for a long time it was a Sony PlayStation. It was never a Microsoft Xbox, and we can get that out of the way. It was always going to be an Xbox. But I felt Sega had enough cachet and enough coolness, certainly in the American market, when I started talking to gamers and immersing myself in the industry. So I made sure that it was the Sega Dreamcast. When you see the packaging, like you have behind you, James, somewhere along the line, and I can't quite figure out whether that's European or North American packaging, but I think elsewhere it was just the Dreamcast because they felt that it needed to stand alone. But in the US, it needed the support of the Sega name and the irreverency that came with that, and everything that at Sega, in particular, SEGA of America, Tom Kalinske in those days, more recently Bernie Stoller, who hired me, had made it cool and irreverent and a little different than Sony and Nintendo.
It's really interesting you say that, Peter, because as you said, and as you just alluded to, in Europe, certainly the Sega name was pretty much removed from packaging altogether. And I remember actually reading in magazines at the time, that that was kind of highlighted that they'd taken Sega out of it because of the failure of the Saturn, and they wanted to do that. But it is very much the opposite in America. You look at the packaging, the games and everything, it is always Sega Dreamcast, even as much as the memory cards have got Sega Dreamcast on them rather than just Dreamcast.
And that was my decision. That was me, maybe somewhat naively, but I couldn't understand. Because remember, I came in as Senior Vice President of Marketing, and then within 90 days, somehow, 120 days, I'm the president of SEGA America. So I had the ability to, and packaging was important, positioning was important, the marketing was as important as the product. And we in North America, had to put the sins of our fathers behind us as regards where Sega was. But, Sega, the Sega Scream, the Sega advertising, it was one of those once I started to talk to gamers, and we would do focus groups in San Francisco because I needed to really understand. I'm a shoe dog coming into a video game industry, a technical industry, not really knowing anything about it. But you would say Sega, and they would bark back at you, Sega. And there was something there. In the same way, in my later years at EA, you say EA Sports, and they'll go, it's in the game. It's almost like this reflex that you can't help yourself. And that's a great brand. And as a marketer, I understood that was gold dust, and we needed to leverage that. Despite all of the challenges that Sega had in the previous years, there was something there. There was cachet. There was a love for the brand that we needed to make sure there was good. And I just didn't think Dreamcast could stand alone in the North American market. So it was going to be the Sega Dreamcast.
Fascinating stuff. I mean, just talking about the marketing angle there, the It's Thinking slogan, was very successful in the US. And was there any communication between Sega US and Sega Europe about having a single campaign around the world? Because the 6 billion players thing was what happened in Europe, which obviously ended up Sega Europe getting in trouble for because it wasn't
True.
factual. Yeah, essentially, yeah. So what did you have any thoughts on that? Or
yeah, I mean, two different markets, two different tracks over the previous years that when you dug in, you realize that Europe had gone a different way than North America, or North America had gone a different way than Europe. And we felt we needed to play on what we understood to be some of the more technical benefits of the console in relation to what we knew was in the market. And perhaps more importantly, we knew what was coming down. And the concept that somewhere there was some AI in there, or in the ROM somewhere, there was something that was going to remember you and understand what you were doing and welcome you back every single time you played, and have a knowledge which we take for granted now with cookies and caching of stuff. But in those days, this was revolutionary stuff. And so the concept of its thinking, we sat down with Foot Cone and Belding, San Francisco, and the team there, and figured out that the idea, but make it mystical, not make it tech, and so and the idea was actually it would whisper to you, it's thinking, and it would set you on edge a little bit, because what is it thinking, and what does it know about you? That's
terrifying.
Yeah, and fine, and the target market loved it, and we also figured out our launch date obviously was 9/9/99, and I was in New York for the VMAs, and the VMAs was a big platform, still is, but probably a bigger platform then, and it allowed us to be able to get in and around the MTV crowd, if you will, who lapped up its thinking, and people still remember it to this day. And then of course the launch ad, which was a very expensive ad, filmed in Vancouver over a dozen nights, with 747s and the girl on a a leather suit on a motorbike and what have you. That was in those days, you needed that seminal moment of a TV ad that you can then leverage. There wasn't a lot of digital advertising in those days, so most of it was television, and certainly print and magazines. There were no influencers per se, because there was no platforms for influencers, but we needed to do something big, and we needed to get out early, and we needed to get out ahead of the incoming PlayStation, marketing barrage, which we knew would come. But we needed to differentiate, and that's what its thinking was about. FCB did a brilliant job in creating that, and it played into both the mystical side of gaming, as well as the technology. And I thought it was a great line, because it was more, yes, it was a statement, but it was a question as well, because it just led to, what is it thinking about? How is it thinking? How can it think? It's a machine, blah, 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 that type of thing.
It definitely moved things along, I think, because Sony certainly changed the way they marketed consoles and games, because it went from all of a sudden being a thing that kids did to a thing that young adults did. And I guess Dreamcast certainly pushed that on. Before we cover, because you mentioned the launch there, before we go back to the launch, because I know Tom's got a question around the launch that he wants to get to the bottom of. You mentioned earlier about the online aspects of the Dreamcast, and obviously it was a big deal, and it was pretty well promoted at the time. I was watching the Xbox discussion you had with Reggie and co recently, and they were talking there even at that point about whether they put a modem or a broadband adapter in with the Xbox. Right. How difficult were those discussions, and how adamant were you guys that you needed to put the internet connection in there with the Dreamcast from day one?
Well, that decision was made before my arrival, and was the right decision. Was made in Japan. To differentiate. And the owner of Sega, Okawa-san, was the one that really believed in this, and he was bankrolling Sega. Unfortunately, during my tenure there, he passed away. But what a wonderful man that Sega wouldn't be around today if it wasn't for Okawa-san, who truly believed not so much in gaming, but the fact that games would bring us all together socially, and the only way to do that, other than with your mate coming around sitting next to you on the couch, was to build an online community, and his business was moving rapidly to online. He ran, I know, in some of the biggest call and contact centers in Japan. If I recall, primarily up in Okinawa. And he understood how the internet was changing things. And you got to remember, in those days, we had this false start on the internet that started, and everybody was gathering millions of eyeballs, and all of a sudden we had the internet bubble burst in 2000, and Sega was right in the middle of that, and right in the middle of it geographically, south of Market in San Francisco, where if there was an epicenter for the internet, you could point to those few streets on Second Street and Howard and Brannan and Mission and Bryant. I mean, that's where the internet was starting to build, and all of these startup companies were being incubated there in this very cool part of San Francisco. And Sega was right in the middle of it at 650 Townsend. It sat on this intersection, which is now, ironically, or if you will, fortuitously, the Sega headquarters. That the Sega side. It's always weird to me when I go to San Francisco, which I did, and I turn the corner on the freeway, and I expect to see the Sega sign, which you saw from the freeway, and now you see Zynga. And that's fun, and so many of my friends work at Zynga, and it's a great company, but still a little jarring to me not to see that blue Sega sign on the top right-hand corner of on the 6th floor of 650 Townsend Street. So yeah, I think online was going to be critical. There was no going back. It had already been built in. It was a dial-up modem. There was already plans, of course, for the broadband adapter to come later, and that was more focused on how many people would have broadband at some point. And if I recall, it was probably Quake and maybe even Counter-Strike were the games that we needed, that those multiplayer shooters that required faster connections for all the obvious reasons. But yeah, it was always going to be an online console. That was the not so much the gamble. And sometimes you throw yourself on the battlements that somebody else is going to take advantage of. And I think that the Dreamcast and Sega flung themselves onto the battlements, onto the barricades, and launched and maybe was trod on, its body was trod on, as I like to think it was lifted over the barricades, but it was trod on by subsequent consoles. But the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the homes. And we truly believed in online, and that was building, and things like SegaNet and everything we were doing. And I coined a phrase, we're taking gamers where gaming is going. Now, we may not be there when they get there, which in the back of my head, but we certainly took them. We held their hand and we moved them forward.
Wow, yeah, I love the analogy of the Dreamcast sort of leading from the front, leading the fight from the front.
Like a scene from Les Miserables.
Indeed, yeah.
Eventually.
One person who wasn't happy about the Dreamcast being online was my mother, who had a phone line going across the landing from the office to my bedroom every single night. But she won't thank you for it anyway.
Yeah, well, like I say, it was all fun and games till your mum picked up the phone in the other room, and that was the end of it.
Indeed.
Peter, I've got to ask you a question about something that has been bugging me for several years now, and it's going to sound really bizarre and weird, and I hope it doesn't. However, Sega Spud Dive. Mm-hmm. Is this something that you remember, that you're familiar with?
Yeah. Totally,
So for those people listening, the Sega Spud Dive was a sort of a promotional event where people had to dive into vats of mashed potato to get the letters SEGA, and the winner.
Of course they did.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, exactly. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you presented the winner with was it the first Dreamcast available in the US? That was the grand prize.
Yeah.
And so do you remember that day well? Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, if I recall, it was right outside our offices. We had a great PR and marketing team. I think that's probably the brainchild of Heather Hawkins, if I recall. And we were just an irreverent brand. And what you do, everything you have to do needs to bolster your brand positioning. We were irreverent. We were not this kind of tech brand. We certainly weren't the Sony behemoth, this consumer electronics brand. We were Sega. We were just similar to Nintendo, although Nintendo's position was a little bit more family oriented. We were the company that had stood in front of Congress and talked about, blood, green blood and red blood and been there and felt we were carrying the baton for gamers. They're younger consumers. They didn't want to be associated with big, massive corporations, and we played into that. And so, of course, we did a Spud Dive. Of course, we did. And I can still see the winner with goggles on, and we did, and it did what it was set out to do, which is create publicity to bolster the irreverency of the brand, and gave us momentum going into the launch, because if I recall, it was pre-launch, and it was to build that momentum going right into 99.99.
Well, look, I mean, I'm talking about the Spud Dive now, 20 years later, so it obviously had an impact. Yeah, job done.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like tattooing things on your arm. People still talk about it.
Indeed. I still don't know if they're real. I was waiting to whip them out now. So two companies then that you've got a lot of history with, Sega and EA. EA or the lack of EA games on Dreamcast is often cited as kind of one of the main reasons that people suggest that the Dreamcast unfortunately wasn't as successful as we all would have liked. Do you think that having FIFA, for example, or any of the EA Sports games would have made a difference in hindsight, or is it something that you think it was something like that wouldn't really have changed the fate of the console moving forward?
Well, two things. A, I'm still bitter, and it's my current boss who I remind of this, John Riccatello, all the time. But we also kind of shot ourselves in the foot a little bit with EA. I think there was conversations about, look, the Dreamcast was going to be transitional, and there was a infamous conversation that already somebody was working on the Dreamcast 2, and we'll get better then, and we'll get the install base we need. I think EA made a business decision. It forced us into building Sega Sports, which I was front and center, and we built Sega Sports, and then I always remember this I think it was November or December of 99 after launch. We needed a better name than just Sega Sports. In those days, first parties needed to be in the sports business. You needed to have first party sports games. And whilst it would have been great to have had the EA Sports games on, as powerful as they were then and still are, realizing that wasn't going to happen, we had to build our own sports brand, our own sports games. We did NHL, we did NFL, we had Randy Moss on the cover, we had Allen Iverson on the cover of NBA, we had Pedro Martinez of baseball on the cover of MLB, and we built our own sports brand. But we needed to build it out as a real brand. And I got my two heads of marketing, two women, Heather Cashner and Martha Hill, and said, what are we going to call this? I mean, we got to print covers, we got to do all kinds. And it was late 99, and we were heading into the Y2K disaster. And I always remember, I said, look, I'm going to get a case of Corona. We're all going to sit in my office, and we're going to figure out what this is. And the only thing they could come up with was 2K. And because we're all heading in, we're all going to die. Y2K, you guys won't remember it, but it is like computers.
Oh, yeah.
I remember them.
Computers had not been built to handle the digit 2 in the front, and everything was going to crash. So that's where we became 2K Sports. Later, obviously, to be acquired, and Visual Concepts, our studio up in Marin County, north of the Golden Gate Bridge, was doing basketball in particular, but was also doing football. But Greg Thomas and his brother Jeff were doing a great job, huge basketball fans, and look, the rest is history 20 odd years later on, obviously. But we needed to build that sports brand because EA was not going to publish for the Dreamcast, and that forced us into building a brand, and ironically forced us into building the 2K brand, which then of course Take-Two acquired later on, and acquired the Visual Concepts studio. And NBA, of all things, NBA 2K continues to be a behemoth and a thorn in the side, probably, of EA.
Well, you'll be glad to know that both NFL 2K and NBA 2K and 2K1, I think both of them are still playable online on Dreamcast. The Wizards have managed to reverse engineer all the servers, so you can still connect in and play.
Look, I spent a lot of time talking about footprints in the snow in the NFL game with Randy Moss of the Minnesota Vikings at that time on the cover. So, and this again played into the AI and its thinking. So that was a big deal, and seeing the player's breath was a big deal.
We had the US sports games, but obviously from a football or soccer perspective over here, I think that was another contentious area. Was there ever a thought to kind of look into that side, or was it very focused on the US market at that point?
Yeah, for me, in those days, our focus had to be what I'll call indigenous sports. You know, I would have hoped that Europe may have, you know, stepped up and done something. Could you even then have taken on FIFA, which was in its ascendancy, you know, because the FIFA game was already 7 or 8 years of building community and dev team. I assume was Vancouver then, and certainly is now. But I think it was a question of, you look at your dev resources, you look at your expertise, and you go, you know, can we in SEGA of America find a dev studio that's going to take on FIFA and make a difference? And the answer was no. Could SEGA of Europe done it? I don't know. I don't know much about it. And was it already, the die was cast that FIFA had all of this momentum? I think that's probably the case, yeah.
It's probably more of a shame, really, that International Superstar Soccer didn't come across, and you know, with Konami, who did have Dreamcast support, of course, although be it sporadic support for Dreamcast. But it's
that was it. It was, and this is the intermittency of who was going to do what. You know, forced me spent a lot of time in Japan meeting with the Konamis and the Capcoms and the Namcos, and what are you guys going to do? And being there with Sega of Japan, figuring out what the longer term strategy was going to be, because I think everybody had focused on, we're going to do one game and see how it goes. We're going to do maybe a second game if we get an install base that makes fiscal sense, because these are dev resources that you just have to figure out where they're best deployed. And I think, you know, I remember going over there and sitting in the headquarters of these companies and with my Japanese counterparts and trying to convince them that there was longevity in this platform and that they shouldn't move over to PlayStation, which of course was going to ship in March of the following year. But tough conversation to have, because I think a lot of these folks have been burned by previous commitments and promises on previous Sega consoles.
That's a really nice way to sort of move the conversation on, Peter, to the PlayStation 2, the main competition for the Dreamcast. Can you remember what your initial impressions were of the PS2, or what they were from within Sega, and specifically what the feeling was when the details emerged that it would have like a DVD player and how it would kind of shape up next to the Dreamcast? Yeah,
I mean, every day we worried about it, and the moment for me, I remember being in New York and I think calling on Toys R Us, who in those days were a massive part of the retail part of the industry, and picking up a Newsweek magazine. And I knew the story was coming, and I think it was Ungai Kroll, who's a very well respected and a friend, a good, well respected video game writer, and has been for best part of 25 years. And it was the cover story, and it was about the Emotion Engine, and it was about you know, you love Toy Story, well now you can play Toy Story, and all of these things. And if you recall as well, things like the Bouncer and Kessen and you know, all of this stuff were coming out of Japan. And you know, you could see that unless we could get that momentum, the writing was on the wall. And I've always said this publicly, Sony did a brilliant job of fudding everybody, you know, placing fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and positioning the Dreamcast as a transitional platform. That, yeah, you can have some fun for a few months with the Dreamcast, and then, you know, when the real thing comes out in March of 2001, you can move over. So, you know, we knew, or probably March of 2000, actually, I'm trying to get my years right, March of 2000. So it was a real panicked period of us to get that install base, to convince publishers to stay with us, to get our first party games to have momentum, and to get the attach rate. So attach rate is the number of games that are attached to each piece of sold through hardware. And that's the key to you having the revenue flowing in to justify continuing to build more consoles, sell more consoles, and as well concurrently build out what you believed in, which was the online network and all of the infrastructure required. And we were doing all kinds of things like get a free Dreamcast if you sign up for, you know, 2 years of SegaNet. So there was so much that we needed to do frenetically, and you know, flying back into from San Francisco to Tokyo to Haneda Sega headquarters, and meeting with the dev teams. And you know, it didn't help that we were very heavily reliant on Tokyo-based dev teams that continued to resist the movement to broader content I'll call it more Western content. And so, we constantly were kind of peering through the window of what everybody was making there of the 9 development studios. And they would make what they wanted to make that they felt was appropriate, primarily at first for the arcade market. So things like Crazy Taxi and things were built on the Naomi board and then ported to Dreamcast. And some of them really resonated well, and some didn't because they were arcade first, which is, of course, the roots of the company. And to a certain extent, you go to Tokyo and you still see that it's there, that it's an arcade company that happens to make the home console, but arcade first. Out of home was always first.
That kind of leads on to my second question. I suppose you've already answered it in a way, but did you have any conversations with people from the competition and how they viewed the Dreamcast? I mean, you've already mentioned that they saw it as a stepping stone to another console, i.e. the PS2. But did you have any conversations with people who said, Peter, this is what we think of the Dreamcast kind of thing?
Well, I talk to every publisher every day because you're doing evangelical work to try to convince them to invest their precious resources. So every major publisher, with the exception of EA probably, we were having contact. Now, did I talk to Nintendo of America and SEGA? Probably not too much about that, but we were already, we were going to E3s, we were part of a trade association. In those days, it was IDSA. And did I meet them and see them? Sure, of course I did. But, was there substantive conversations about the state of play? Probably not. Very secretive industry. Yeah. Look, in those days, remember, there was none of what we do today in video games. It was like, we're not even going to tell you what we're making. And then, we'll either save it up for E3 or like 3 months out, you'll see what our, launch slate looks like. And we would sit with retailers. Remember, it's all retail. It's GameStop or Software Etc. Babbage's in those days, Electronic Boutique, Toys R Us, some Best Buy, obviously, and the bigger boxes we're building. And there in the UK, I assume would have been Game and HMV and Virgin. Yeah. So, but yeah, it was a different time and different ways, and the industry was still, I don't want to say a fledgling industry, but it was still very much boys in their bedrooms. It was teenage boys, which is why I was hired, because it was seen that if I could sell sneakers to 15-year-old boys, then I could sell video games to 15-year-old boys. And
that's exactly what me and Tom were back in the day.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, and that was the theory of getting a guy from Reebok, from Boston. But from the perspective of and as the industry grew and got substance, and as content became more mature, as graphics became more realistic, as the computing power of the CPUs and the GPUs powered more realistic, immersive content, then people like yourself stayed with it. Because the great majority of your mates would have moved on to other things, because video gaming was a phase you went through, and then it was for boys, and then you had more serious stuff to focus on. But then as gaming became more M-rated, more content, you can point to GTA, Vice City, and all of these things, which all of a sudden gave credence to gaming as something that wasn't just, look at you, you're a gamer in your mum's basement or whatever. That average age of gamers now is in the 30s, and you can point to those days of increased CPU, GPU power, online gaming, people like yourselves finding like-minded individuals across the country, across the world that you felt good about playing with and against, and all of a sudden we became this powerful medium. But it was not like that 20 odd years ago.
Yeah, indeed. Peter, we discussed EA, and you mentioned there you've been doing a lot of day-to-day with different publishers. Is there any other games or game series or accessories, or is there anything else that you were really clambering hard to get on Dreamcast during your time that you either succeeded in doing and it was released, or that you just couldn't convince them to publish on Dreamcast?
Yeah, it was pretty obvious really early on that a lot of publishers had done deals, had been obviously paid, given incentives by the SEGA of Japan or SEGA of America to publish at least once. so that we had still, in my estimation, the greatest launch lineup ever in history. And I don't think there has been a launch lineup of new IP with interesting game genres, mechanics, gameplay, devices, peripherals, fishing rods, and you think about all of the things we did at that time. But then it's sit back, wait and see. And I, it's very hard to blame the publishers that they go, okay, we'll give you a shot. And, we don't have a lot to lose because we've been given incentives. Checks have been written to develop and publish, and got the lineup that we needed. Ready to Rumble, Soul Calibur, Sonic Adventures. You go on and on of what that lineup looked like. Hydro Thunder, Trick Style. And, these are there's no way that would ever happen again. This is all brand new IP for the most part, all from different publishers, all who were incentivized to give it a go. And ultimately it didn't work out. But, you think of all the stuff, Seaman later on, and the quirkiness of what Sega was able to do. And I think Sega getting out of the hardware business ultimately just financially couldn't, keep up anymore. There's a hole in the industry for the stuff that they would bring, and a lot of it was built because you could amortize it in the arcades, primarily in Tokyo, and say, all right, we're going to do this game, and it's going to have quirky peripherals. And I remember Derby Owners Racing Club, the massive arcade games where you sit, and a lot of it was a facade for gambling. But you have this, and the industry is a poorer place because of the lack of that kind of innovative, quirky, irreverent stuff that pushed the boundaries of what gaming was.
Yeah, totally agree. Peter, just moving slightly away from the sort of the games, I just want to talk a little bit about the hardware. And you may not know anything about this, and if you don't, then that's fine. But there was an article in a UK magazine called Total Control, claiming that a Sega spokesperson, in inverted commas, had spoken to them and claimed that the Dreamcast would be iterated, and that future revisions of the console would have more RAM and have greater capabilities than the base unit. Do you know anything about that? Was there anything like that on the cards? Or
this is from those days, not right now. This is
from way back then. So back in 1999, I think it was.
Yeah, there was no look. There may have been somewhere in some back rooms in Haneda that the hardware teams were focused on, a next generational thing. But what you didn't need was a repeat of the Saturn or whatever, which is, all right, this ain't working. We're going to try something else, and abandon people that had invested heavily in the Dreamcast, and then, walk away from that and try something else 2 years later. No, I think lessons have been learned there. But I certainly wasn't privy, and I wouldn't have been as a subsidiary privy to any longer term plans to either iterate or abandon and move on. This was all chips were pushed across the table to get the Dreamcast to land, to get online to land, to get SegaNet to land, to bring publishers along with us who felt that they could justify precious dev resources being applied to game 2, to game 3 in 2001, 2002. And in the end, it just didn't work out. And we were going back into, in late 2000, that second Christmas, back to Japan and working the numbers and pushing hard to get retailers to push and started to do pricing to get the install base. As I said earlier, wacky things like get a free Dreamcast if you sign up for 2 years, I think, of SegaNet, where we felt we could justify the cost of that based on subscription revenue and or attach rate of games being bought to play. But the pickup rate on that, fraud, I remember, was rampant. So it was all in for Christmas 2000. We knew the numbers. We knew what we needed to hit. We knew what we got our sell-in. I mean, the sell-in, I don't want to say is easy, but the sell-in of moving stuff in there for Christmas wasn't that difficult to do. Our teams, Chris Gilbert, who was head of sales, Tim Flynn, these guys did a brilliant job of getting it all sold in, but the sell-through was critical. And it was pretty clear. You knew within days of Christmas what the sell-through numbers were, because the retailers would provide you those numbers. And it was very much, it was a somber, first kind of week of January when it became evident that this became an unsustainable business. That, look, you're losing money on the hardware anyway. And if you're putting it in there and it's not selling software or peripherals, or you're not getting subscriptions to Sega now, then there's only one thing you can do. You're bleeding, you're hemorrhaging at that point. And this was not a company that was flush with cash that could manage that for a year, 18 months. I mean, just did not have the capital necessary. And so, back into the Haneda in early January, and then they made the decision that we need to pull the plug. And of course, I was pushed forward to make the telephone call, often referred to as the call, which is like I somehow decided a Japanese decision that we were going to, quote unquote, kill the Dreamcast. The Dreamcast decision was made in Haneda in early January to mid-January that we couldn't sustain a hardware business, that we were going to move to be a third-party publisher and lean back on the strength of the 9 development studios that were there in Japan. But somebody needed to tell the world that, and it needed to be in English. And so, if I recall, January 31st, it was my job to host a conference call and tell the world what was happening. And unfortunately, that led to a lot of layoffs that day as well, which was a very sad day. But yeah, I'm often accused of killing the Dreamcast, and bluntly, nothing could. It'd still be there left to me. It'd still be trying to sell it right now, 20 years later. But it was left to me to explain to the world that we needed, on this telephone call, that we needed, unfortunately, to step away and become a third-party publisher. And then my life was calling my friends at Sony and Nintendo, asking for dev kits.
Fascinating. Well, Peter, I feel like we could talk to you for another 3 or 4 hours, but that would probably get in the way of you actually doing some work. So
yeah, my day job is about to start pretty soon here. But
indeed,
let me leave you one more thing. Hang on a second. Hold on.
Hi, Tom from the future here. I just thought I'd cut myself into the podcast so you know what the next few seconds are all about. Basically, Peter put on a kind of almost like a silk-style jacket. I think it was silk. Anyway, it looked silky to me. It might be leather, with a Dreamcast logo on it, which we were obviously suitably impressed by. He then positioned his camera and stepped back to reveal that throughout the entire time we'd been speaking to him, he had been wearing a pair of Dreamcast branded shorts as well, to create this kind of nice, almost like a trouser suit effect kind of thing that he was wearing. So that's what we're reacting to in the next part of this podcast. If you want to actually see it, you can view the video version of this interview on our YouTube channel or on our blog. Right, back to the interview.
We can't do it if we're not going to do it properly.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Love it.
Yeah, but not only that, let's see if I can get the camera right. This may be M-rated.
Oh, wow. Yes, that's awesome.
We're going to have to give them away as a competition prize now, Peter. You're gonna have to send us.
Well, you're not having mine.
You're gonna have to send us a photograph of you in that now.
Well, you recorded it. I'll teach you how to do a screenshot from Zoom. If you don't know how to do that. No, thank you guys. It's wonderful, and thank you to everybody that will watch this for their continued support of our beloved Dreamcast. I like to think that everything that gamers enjoy today and take for granted of playing online and playing against millions of people, that the little device that threw itself on the barricades, so that the Sega Dreamcast was the entree to that, and the baton was passed to those that came afterwards. And it's with great pride, if you owned a Dreamcast. And by the way, if you don't own a Dreamcast, from what I understand, you can get them on eBay pretty easily. And
they're going up in price solid again now.
Yeah, well, they're still rock solid little devices, and there's enough emulators around, I believe, that stuff can play. And it's go play Crazy Taxi, go play Ready to Rumble, go play Hydro Thunder, go play Soul Calibur, Go find Seaman. And these were all great games that I miss.
Don't forget Spirit of Speed 1937, hey James.
Oh yeah, look, there's hundreds. We could go on forever here, but I appreciate everybody's support, and these were great times. And if you're a little younger, it's always interesting, and you should know from which the roots of the gaming industry, you know, those that invested heavily their time, their effort, their blood, sweat, and tears. And there's a lot of people at Sega still today in Tokyo, and still today the Sega crowd here in North America and over there in Europe that think fondly of it.
Indeed. Thank you, Peter. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you, mate. You two have a great weekend. Cheers, Peter.
Have a great weekend.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, so that was the interview with Peter Moore. Hopefully you enjoyed that. As I said earlier on, if you want to watch the video and see what me and James were actually in awe of, his outfit, you can find that on the YouTube channel and on our blog. That was quite the outfit.
Indeed, if you needed further proof that Peter Moore genuinely loved the Dreamcast, the fact that he stood there for a 45-minute interview with some Dreamcast shorts on without revealing them to us till the very end kind of tells you all you need to know about the guy, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And just another thing as well is that we had more questions, but because we ran out of time, essentially, there were so many things that we just didn't get around to asking. And I'm sure he would have been fine answering them rather. And he was a really cool guest.
It was quite funny actually, because before we obviously Tom and I jumped on the call about half an hour before Peter was due to join us, just to kind of talk through the battle plan, as it were. And we'd listed a load of questions down, and I'd kind of said that, you know, I think the questions, he's going to answer them really well, and I think he's genuinely interested in the topic. But whenever you interview anybody, especially someone like Peter Moore, there's always this fear in the back of your head that you get kind of like 1 or 2 sentence answers to every question. And I remember saying to you, Tom, before we started, oh my God, imagine if, you know, we're done and dusted in 10 minutes and we've got to spend the next half an hour sort of ad-libbing questions about something. And it couldn't have been, as you said, more further from the truth, really. It was, as I said at the time in the interview, I feel like we could have spoken to him all afternoon, and if he didn't have a very important job to do, I'm sure he would have, or he could have done the same as well. But yeah, it was great to speak to him. Some great insight there, and yeah, I think it's probably, you know, his history in both gaming and in business in general. Obviously, some of the roles that he's had has been remarkable, really. And I know he talks a lot about his time at Liverpool recently, his time at Xbox, his time at EA. But I think his time at Sega is probably something that he doesn't often get a chance to talk about in much detail. So it was, it was just great to focus on that with him.
There was definite child on Christmas Day energy from Tom when he got to ask Peter about the Sega Spud dive.
That was another one actually, which I was kind of worried that he'd have like zero recollection of. That it was just something that his name was associated with. And I actually sent him a copy of the scan from the Dreamcast magazine where they feature that, just in case his memory needed jogging. But yeah, he seemed to remember it pretty well, to be fair.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed the interview. Obviously, if you've got any comments, do let us know on Twitter at the DC Junkyard. Likewise, on our YouTube channel or on the blog if you want to comment there. But now we're going to move away from the Peter Moore interview, and we're going to focus on you guys, the people listening to this, and the people we do this for, essentially. And we ask you via our Twitter account and you know, other social media streams to send us some questions, send us some comments. You know, this is our 100th episode. We've been doing this for 100 hours and more. And, you know, we've not gone mad yet. So there's that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I don't know if yourself, Andrew, or Lewis, you want to sort of take over and guide us through the questions that we've been sent, and then we can go around and answer them and just have a bit of a good chin wag.
Yeah, absolutely. So our first question is from Green Viper, who runs Radio Sega, which is a great institution for those who love Sega music. And he has a bit of a comment and a question, so I'll go through both. So he says, "Hey all, just wanted to say a huge congrats on reaching such a big milestone. I've been a listener since episode 0 dropped on that fateful day, so it's great to have been on this journey with you all the way to the big one. The show inspired me to get a Dreamcast of my own for the first time, to explore the library and fill out my personal collection, and eventually led me to hosting my own short-lived Dreamcast podcast, which greased the wheels for what I do now with Radio Sega and beyond, so I owe this pod a lot. which is very nice. Thank you very much, Green Viper. His question is, are there any hosts of the DreamPod from days gone by that you'd love to get back on for another episode? It's great to hear how the crew has evolved and gone through various iterations over the years, and absolutely understand how hard it is to coordinate getting everyone together for a podcast. Yes, it is. So he says, thank you all again, and here's to the next milestone.
That's a great question. I guess I should answer that one because I've been here from obviously episode 0. I mean, obviously I appreciate everybody who's been on the podcast over the years. It's nearly 6 years now we've been doing this, and as Green Viper alludes to, it's almost like it's been like a sort of an evolution from the original crew to what we have now. Everyone brings something different. Everyone's got a different personality, and it's fantastic. All of the hosts of past and present, I appreciate. As I say, I'd like to one day maybe get Caleb back on the pod, simply for his amazing impression of Jesse the Body Ventura, which is a favourite, from times gone by. Everyone really, Aaron, the Gaga Man, Rob, obviously those two were on the 5th anniversary episode that we did about a year ago now. Everyone who's been on the pod has been great, to be honest. We've had loads of great guests. But there were people like Gaz, who was on the pod for the first 10 or so episodes and then just couldn't really find the time to do it anymore, so he kind of dropped off. There's people who've been and gone. We've had Ross, we had Martin recently over in Germany. We've had a good sort of turnaround. I'm still in touch with everybody, and when they can get back on the pod, and if time allows, then they will. But I think we've got a really good team and dynamic now. I'm happy with the crew as it is now, and also everybody who's been on previously. And everyone's welcome whenever they want to come back on. So yeah,
cool, awesome. Should we move along to the next question, or does anybody else have any hosts that they really want to come back?
I think the question should have been more, Tom has to get rid of one. Who would he get rid of the current host? That would have been more fun, wouldn't it?
I mean, he's going to pick you now, James, isn't he?
Of course he is.
Probably James. Yeah. Sorry, move on. Yeah.
After that really long message that Andrew read out, here I am with a very short one from Retro Faith, obviously great YouTuber and streamer, big in the Sega community, amazing Dreamcast collection. And she just simply says, congratulations guys on 100 episodes, always enjoy the news discussions.
And I would like to say congratulations, Retro Faith, on your amazing Dreamcast collection. I don't really frequent Twitter very often, but when I do go on it and I see tweets from her, she has ridiculous amounts of boxed, mint condition Dreamcast stuff.
Absolutely need to get Retro Faith on as well. I think I've actually spoken to her about coming on, so we should get her on to talk about collecting Dreamcast, maybe with Mike, who's also I think you're a Dreamcast collector, right, Mike? You've just got a few things.
I dabble.
Yeah, a few odds and ends just lying around here.
You got some new things today, didn't you, Mike?
I did get some new things. Yeah, I got 6 new indie games today.
Which means A to Z soon. No pressure.
Yes. Cheers for that, Lewis. Yeah.
Yeah.
What you should do with that A to Z, Mike, is just, I think we've said this before on the podcast, is just release new pages as DLC that people can print off and stick in the back of the book.
Or do it as a subscription model. So you get A in January and then B in February.
Yeah.
Everyone loves a subscription nowadays.
Or release the pages as NFTs. So yeah, 1 million Ethereum for each. Thank you.
How's your NFT going, Lewis, just on that topic? You've got an NFT.
For context, I don't believe in polluting the environment. It was free when I pre-ordered a song from a band I like.
Covering yourself there, nice.
Yeah.
So we have Uncle Clutch, which is at Karok Umo Clutch. I don't know how to pronounce that, but thank you very much for your question. I've just slaughtered your Twitter handle. Congrats, gents. There's always rumours and memes about a DC2. It's foolish to believe at this point, but would anyone still want to see it? And he says, part of my DC love stems from that time in my life. Also, the ground it broke at that time, and nothing could resurrect that feeling. What are our thoughts about Dreamcast 2?
I would like to also say thank you to Uncle Clutch for the amazing artwork he drew for our blog banner several years ago, which was literally a Dreamcast Junkyard. It's just a junkyard full of Dreamcast characters and whatnot. He's an amazing artist. So thank you to him. And an amazing wrestler as well, I believe. And wasn't he on America's Got Talent or something as well? And did
Was he really?
Yeah, he was. Yeah, there's a clip of him on America's Got Talent. Yeah.
Wow.
Regarding the Dreamcast 2, I think it'd be foolish for me to say here on this podcast that everyone here would probably have liked the Dreamcast to have succeeded and have become the success it deserved to be. Whether or not a Dreamcast 2 would be viable now, I doubt very much. Gaming's moved on since the day of the Dreamcast. I know it's a really weird hypothetical question, isn't it? Because there's so many different variables that could have happened for that to have happened. That makes sense. But yeah, I mean, if the Dreamcast had been the massive success that it should have been, then I've no doubt that Sega would have followed it with another console. Whether or not it would have been called the Dreamcast 2, I don't know, because they didn't really do that then. They didn't say, I know there was like the Mega Drive 2 and that kind of thing, but they were just iterations of the same hardware in a different case. So maybe we would have seen a Dreamcast Slim or something like that, or even, heaven forfend, a Dreamcast Mini, something like that. But as for a Dreamcast 2, yeah, I would have loved to have seen one, but it's a conversation that could go on for several hours with no real answers.
I don't know. I think I have a pretty definitive answer.
Go for it.
If I must say so. The Dreamcast 2, from where I stand, the Dreamcast 2 does exist. It continues to exist, and it is in all of us. It is in our hearts. And yeah, no, but seriously, I guess I'm always kind of the mind to appreciate where things are versus dwelling on, how they could have been. And when I look at how gaming has evolved over the last few generations, I mean, you see a indie scene that has really kind of taken the mantle of that, I guess, Dreamcast spirit, so to speak, where you have a lot of devs who are now taking risks and making really creative projects and exploring concepts that you wouldn't necessarily associate traditionally with a video game type experience, but Sega did that, right? That was kind of the core of a lot of the games that defined the Dreamcast, with Seaman and Space Channel 5 and Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio, all those. I mean, it's you're giving the player verbs and concepts that aren't necessarily shooting or platforming or can be squarely fit in a clear-cut genre, and you see that freedom of expression continue today with stuff like Rocket League or Umurangi Generation, or some of those games just over the years. Untitled Goose Game, I think. I mean, there's a lot of games that for me really tap into that Dreamcast spirit that I really enjoyed about the Sega's old heyday and their style of development ethos.
Yeah, that's a really great answer, to be honest. Yeah.
Adding on to what Brian said, is for me, it was all about the games, and a little part of me wishes Sega kind of, were doing more in regards to releasing more like Yakuza, more like the most recent Sakura Wars game, just continuing that legacy of good quality games. And unfortunately, we saw stuff like Sonic 06 and whatever, so they've not had their an incredible track record, but when they have done good stuff, it's been good, and I just want more of that consistently, I suppose. And I think that's fine for me. I don't need a Dreamcast 2 if Sega's continue to be awesome. So
yeah. I think I mean, similar to you, Lewis, I think if the question is could Sega essentially bring one out now, I think the inevitable kind of reaction to that would be that Sega would cease to exist probably within 5 years, because they just don't have they're not in the financial position that they were back in the day in terms of a dominant industry leader. So yeah, I mean, just like you, Lewis, I'd rather see Sega knocking out great games than I would see them knock out a console that probably there isn't really space for in the market anymore, and then kind of just go out with a kind of a big bang kind of thing. I think I'd rather see Sega just doing what they're doing. And
also, just to add something on to the end of that, just harking back to something that Brian said earlier, if the Dreamcast had been as successful as it should have been, and then we'd had consequent console releases from Sega, would the console be as revered as it is now? Would it be as mythical? And also, would the indie scene be as fervent as it is around the Dreamcast? I doubt that very much.
We would have ended up with a Call of Duty on the Dreamcast 3, wouldn't we?
Oh, don't.
Yeah.
Don't.
What you could have done is you could have used your VMU3 to like slam it into the bottom of the controller like a magazine. Do you know what I mean? To reload.
Do you know, a more interesting question on around Dreamcast 2 would have been at the time would have been whether or not the Xbox, because I know obviously Sega wanted the Xbox to be able to play Dreamcast games, if memory serves me correctly, and if that was actually greenlit, how much that would have maybe opened Dreamcast games to a wider audience of people that never played them when it was not too far away from them being just released, and subsequently what that could have done with the sequels, and we may have been seeing sequels to Crazy Taxi and Shenmue a lot sooner than we did, and other things prior to the direction that Sega went off in and focused on a lot of new IP and things like that. So that certainly would have been interesting.
Why didn't you ask that to Peter Moore?
Would have been good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we missed that one. Oh.
Only thing with that is that I think inevitably, eventually, Microsoft would probably have bought Sega in that scenario, and then we wouldn't have. We've seen what Microsoft did with a lot of kind of dev houses during the kind of early days of Xbox, so they probably would have ballsed it up, being really honest. So yeah, I'm very, very glad that didn't happen.
Yeah, we'd have like Shenmue Connect Sports or something.
Oh God, can you imagine?
Might be playable.
Lucky hit.
Yeah. I promised I wasn't going to rip on Shenmue anymore after you were so nice to me on the other pod about Spirit of Speed.
But you broke that promise.
The first possible opportunity to rip on Shenmue.
Got a really cool one here from Luke Benstead, obviously the developer of the Simulant engine and DreamPod, and he says, "Here's my question: if you could have a new Dreamcast indie game, what would it be?"
I mean, are we interpreting this as new, as in like a recent indie game that exists that we would want to play on the Dreamcast, or conceptually we're making up a doesn't exist?
Conceptually, yeah, that's what he's going for.
I can start this one because I've actually got an answer, and it's actually thanks to Luke, really. The his kind of game engine that he's been working on for a while, and obviously he released the proof of concept sort of demo before
Tunnels,
is kind of everything I want from an indie game. And I think, again, Tom, you and I were having this conversation the other day, and I've never really been massively into the indie scene on Dreamcast because for the most part of it, they're just games that have been ported onto Dreamcast that kind of don't feel like Dreamcast games, if that makes sense. And I think what I want out of indie game, I don't care what the genre is, I don't care what what the type of game it is. I just want it to look and feel like a Dreamcast game that would have come out back in 99, 2000, 2001. Primitive by today's standards, 3D polygons, and I just want it to feel like a proper Dreamcast game from when the console first came out, and that's kind of what you got from Tunnels. And I hope people take that concept and actually build some games around that. That feel like Dreamcast games. It's obviously very cool that we do get ports of all these wonderful indie games on Dreamcast, but they just don't feel like Dreamcast games to me, which if that makes any sense. So yeah, I don't care as long as it looks and feels like a Dreamcast game. And if somebody out there wants to make the first Dreamcast indie game that's online compatible, then that would obviously be a big first as well.
Well, we almost had that, and this is going to feed into my answer, and my answer would be, if I could have any new Dreamcast indie game, I would have a game that was almost made but failed its Kickstarter, and that game is In the Line of Fire, which was the bank heist first-person shoot 'em up.
Yeah.
That was kickstarted a couple of years ago now and failed. It was a great engine. It looked like a first-party game for the Dreamcast, but made by an indie dev team. Amazing graphics. Some really interesting concepts around cover shooting and how to order your AI accomplices to give you covering fire, that kind of thing. But again, it didn't make its target on Kickstarter. So I'd love to see that, to be honest, and maybe that built in the Simulant engine would be an easier way to go.
I think that I agree with a lot of what James has said, because I mean, don't get me wrong, I love stuff like Intrepid Izzy, which, am I right, that was built for the Dreamcast and then is being ported away from the Dreamcast, is that right?
Yeah, it was developed sort of in tandem, wasn't it, with Dreamcast and for the PC. So
okay, yeah, which is a great way to do it. It's awesome, but yeah, like you say, a lot of the indie stuff is from elsewhere and ported over, or is on multiple platforms all at the same time. So having stuff that is just for the Dreamcast and looks like a Dreamcast game would be great. I think myself, Mike, and Lewis had this conversation about a year ago about how difficult that could be. But now with things like the Simulant engine, suddenly it doesn't seem so difficult. So a horror game would be great in a Dreamcast Code Veronica Blue Stinger style. Would be fantastic to have. I love horror games. If anybody is out there wanting to make an indie horror game for the Dreamcast, maybe using the Simulant engine, yeah, that'd be pretty much my dream for an indie game for the Dreamcast.
I love how Wave Game Studios have responded to that question by starts taking notes.
So I mean, I'd go just for more kart races. You know, I know everyone's been a bit more kind of well thought out than that, but for me, I really love the kart races that are on the Dreamcast, but I feel like we're missing a few. So you know, massive fan of Wacky Races, massive fan of Looney Tunes Space Race. I'll just love a few more in that kind of cel shaded kind of indie kart racer genre. That'd be fantastic.
Someone could take the Flintstones and actually make it playable.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that'd be good. That'd be really good.
I think my mind goes to like what are some experiences or games that could only exist on the Dreamcast, and there would be zero market viability for this whatsoever. Whoever makes it would dump a ton of time for almost zero return because nobody could play it this way. But a game that utilizes every single peripheral ever released. It might be like a life sim type game, or I'm envisioning like a job simulator or something. But you would have you could use the fishing controller to catch fish. You could I don't know what a cooking peripheral will be. You could use the gun to cook it somehow.
Maybe the maracas, you could use the maracas.
Yeah,
fry,
I was thinking the maracas you could saute. Yeah, it'd just be like a full-on kitchen, maybe like an overcooked hybrid between like overcooked
steering wheel. You've got to drive to the fishing lake first.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you have to kind of run back and forth and sustain the village or something.
Or you could use the Dreamcast printer to print out the receipts from the shop.
Yes.
I think for me, just something a bit more sort of Sega loving, as it were. So sort of a Sega Gaga, but sort of set in modern age, that kind of thing. Sort of a bit of love for Dreamcast and Sega in some sort of RPG type format would be a really cool indie game.
Yeah, I agree with Mike. Like a lot of stuff that pays tribute to Sega is like always something that will be enjoyed on the Dreamcast because, you know, that's its target audience, I suppose. But I'm
pretty surprised that nobody, even just on the topic of Sega Gaga, there, I'm surprised nobody, or rather Sega itself, has not done a super meta game called like Save the Dreamcast or something where you assume the role of a Peter Moore or an executive in Sega at that time and have to try and make the Dreamcast the sales success that it should have been.
Yep.
Yeah, I also wonder if their outlook when Sega Gaga was in development was a little more optimistic for the future of the company, that they could turn things around at that point compared to if they tried to make that now. It would be a little bit of a different game, I think.
The only other one I was going to say is maybe some sort of indie game where you steal money and stuff. Like maybe the Elysian Shadows team could work on it or something like that, maybe.
Slave would be nice as well. If we finally get Slave after all these years.
God, what happened to that? I remember getting an email about 9 months ago saying it's still coming, and then
is it maybe Elysian Shadows team were like first to the NFT craze, and I've paid like 60 quid or whatever it was, and I've got some sort of screenshot to show for it. I'm still bitter about it.
Really? Couldn't tell. So we move on to the next question before we make this a DiskPod. So talking about that, Gary Meacher at Gary Meacher on Twitter asks, does disc rot keep you awake at night?
Yes.
No, because I've got a GDMU. That's it. That's the answer. Sorry,
I reckon it keeps Mike awake at night. That's a lot of discs.
Yeah, don't know.
collectors don't play their games. Come on now.
Collectors and YouTubers do not play games. They put them on a shelf and they have it in the background. That's it.
As a YouTuber, I can confirm. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I am actually concerned about disc rot because, I recently unboxed Seaman and the little green mic cover has like disintegrated, and someone in our Discord said this is caused by moisture in the air and
humidity.
Yeah, and we have had mold problems in our house. I think we've sorted them, but obviously, like, what if it gets to the discs, man? I don't know how I'll live with that.
Yeah, there are certain games that are more susceptible. I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, and I apologise if it's boring to you guys, but I wrote an article years ago about Wild Metal, which is a game for the Dreamcast where you control little tanks. And that game in particular seems very susceptible to disc rot. I have bought, I would say, about 8 copies of it in the last decade to try and play it again off a disc, and every single copy I bought does not work.
You're being for real right now.
I'm being for real, and it's one of those games that is really common. You always see it really cheap, so sometimes you get it for £1 or £2 or something like that on eBay. And I've bought multiple copies of it just to play it again, and none of them work.
That's so weird.
Yeah, it's that game, and I don't know why. I've tried it in multiple Dreamcasts and multiple copies of it, and it's almost like Wild Metal is kind of destroying itself. It's not a great game, do you know what I mean? So
maybe it's self-aware.
Yeah, yeah, it's like trying to stop people from playing it because it's so bad.
I feel like disc rot is one of those things that's like blown massively out of proportion.
Yeah.
I mean, I've personally, even with everything up in my attic, the only sort of damage I've ever seen to CDs have been like CDRs and stuff that have, like, over the years obviously have just been in sort of lying about. I've never experienced any sort of boxed game have anything like that wrong with it, but maybe in 20 years it will. I don't know.
I had a copy of Sonic Adventure 2 and I hadn't taken it out of the disc, out of the box for years, for obvious reasons. But I took it out, this was about a year ago, and looked at the disc, and it almost looked like, like as if something had been eating the disc. Like it was like a little sort of spiral shape on where the data is. And I was just looking at that and thinking, what in the world has done that? And I still to this day don't know. But I mean, if that is a visual representation of disc rot, then it is quite a scary thing that these discs can kind of, degrade over time. And there will come a time, obviously, in the distant future where none of them work. I think there will come a time in the distant future where there is not a single working Dreamcast. Obviously that's way off in the future, but yeah, it's a scary thought.
Yeah, I mean, you could pick any form of media, physical media or digital for that matter, and there's a end of life for all of it, right? Like nothing's going to last forever. I think this problem is something that I do think it's real to an extent. I mean, it also depends on where you live. It depends on how warm or humid your environment is. There's other conditions that people theorize impact it, but it's also something that maybe just kind of forces our hand and keeps us on our toes as a community, like keeps us creative in pursuing things like, optical disc drive replacements or other alternatives and SD drives and GDMUs and all of those Terra Onion modes. Like, I don't know. I honestly see the end of that is like us forcing everybody to redouble their efforts in preserving these games in whatever form that they're able to. And I actually think it's incredibly encouraging that we've reacted as a community to this issue in this way. So it does give me hope that these games will continue to be alive for the foreseeable future.
Obviously, I'm sure that it does exist in other console communities, but I think the Dreamcast is, it's at the forefront really, especially with things like, as you say, Brian, with like GDMU and the different ways that you can get these files into a Dreamcast. There's so many different options. You've got SD adapters, you've got the as I say, the GDMU and variations on that. You've got the flash cart version of the Dreamcast that both myself and Mike have tried out. So there's multiple ways of doing it, and I think it's really encouraging, as you say, again that it's almost like the norm within the Dreamcast community now that you will have a system that can take games in a non-disc format, which is cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think a lot of it is driven maybe more by the hardware side rather than the disc rod or software side. I mean, I have like 5 Dreamcasts, and 3 of the disc drives have just slowly but surely all died over the years. So it's like I see the immediate need for those solutions, and enough people have they've been creative and I don't know, just ambitious enough to figure out those workarounds in ways that I think are becoming more accessible, more affordable, easier to obtain than they have been when they were first introduced. So that's also very encouraging.
Yeah, 100%. And being affordable and accessible is really important too, because as we've seen, especially over the last 2 years, the price of Dreamcast games, disc-based games, have skyrocketed, obviously depending on the game. So the ability for people, especially people who are new to the Dreamcast, who have only discovered it recently, or people who sold their collection a long time ago and are now rebuying stuff, it's really difficult to buy the games that you love now because so many of them are so expensive. So having something, where people have preserved these games and they're able to be downloaded and played still, without having to spend an obscene amount of money on, a copy of Project Justice or a copy of, I don't know, what other expensive games, Sega Gaga or whatever. That's awesome that we have that in this community, that we can just download those games. So yeah, the whole thing is great.
I was going to say, so I had to sell off part of my collection a few years ago. I had a bit of just a need for cash. Kind of some unexpected things came up, and I had to just get rid of maybe like 30, 40 games just to kind of bring some immediate cash in. And like if I actually went back to try and buy those games now physically, I probably couldn't do it. It's just the price has just absolutely skyrocketed since 2018. So yeah, just having that ability to potentially do that if needed is just a lifesaver, really.
Yeah,
Mike,
totally.
Mike, you're gonna have to buy an extra copy of every game you've got, Mike, just to potentially avoid disc rot in the future.
Yeah, no. I do have a few extra copies, but I mean, I looked through my collection last year, and this room is particularly humid in summer, and not a single disc rot issue, not a single problem with that. The only problem I had is the fact that the staples in the instruction manuals really quickly rot, really rust, sorry. Quite a few of them are really bad at it, so that's more of a problem for me, to be honest with you.
I bought sealed games, and they've been rusted by the time I've taken the manual out, which is interesting.
I see Mike's collection as almost like the Dreamcast equivalent of that, that seed bank in the Arctic.
Yes.
Where everything's kind of kept at a nice temperature and is there pristine and preserved for future generations.
Oh, I wish it was kept at a nice temperature, because it is literally impossible to play some games with the heat bearing down on me, and the Dreamcast like a small oven in front of me. It's
I think the best thing as well is you've actually got that life-sized cardboard cutout of Commander Worf guarding it.
Yeah, well, it's next to my giant life-size cutout of Tom Charnock, which I've also put in the room now. It's just one of those things, I want to sort of bring it to life.
Are they in alphabetical order, Mike?
The games?
Yeah.
Not a fucking chance.
They're in autobiographical order.
I mean, they're currently sat in boxes on the floor, so I mean, there's very little.
I've just got the visions of Mike going through to do his A to Z reviews, and he opens up Quake Arena, and inside Quake Arena is Jimmy White's Whirlwind 2, and inside Jimmy White's Whirlwind 2 he's got this constant no end to find the game that he needs to find.
No, the order is just wherever I can find space.
We have one more text question, and that is from David Reichelt. Sorry, I'm really sorry. Anyway, your question is, what do you think is the essence of a typical Dreamcast game?
I'm going to steal a phrase from UK Resistance. It's blue skies in games. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got the blue sky in Crazy Taxi, the blue sky in, I don't know, Virtua Fighter, Soul Calibur, Sonic Adventure. It's just nice sunny weather and really bold colours, and that is the essence of a Dreamcast game for me.
I got into collecting the Dreamcast around the time of like the Xbox 360, and other than the Wii, you know, I saw a lot of like kind of grey in the sort of popular games at the time, you know, Call of Duty and all these. Obviously, I do like some of these games. It's just they all seemed a bit sort of dreary to me, and I already live in England, so everything's dreary anyway. And you know, so and then I was like getting into the Dreamcast, and I'm playing these games that are just like you say, blue skies, just color everywhere, and it's just really just fun, you know. Just
I love the. Do you remember the first time you ever played Sonic Adventure and you went to the first action stage, and you just saw them waves lapping up on that sand?
Yep.
It's just like that is Dreamcast to me. That scene, you know, that beach, that sun.
Yeah, I mean, the aesthetics, are very iconic in that sense for across a lot of Sega's, you know, mid '90s to late '90s and early 2000s library. I mean, the Saturn kind of had a lot of that in their arcades, obviously, with, you know, Daytona USA and Sega Rally, and, you know, there were a lot of blue skies to go around. But you know, for the Dreamcast specifically, I feel like I associate it also with you know, other than just the you know, bold presentation elements, I also associate it with I don't know, I would say a forward thinkingness in just concepts. I mean, I was kind of describing this a little bit earlier, but the idea that so many of its most iconic games refused to, or like, you know, really did push you know, push the definitions of what genre you could classify them as, that were really taking new concepts and just saying, hey, you can make a game around talking to a fish. I didn't know if you'd ever tried that, but we're doing it. And I feel like Sega's you know, in-house development studios were just firing on all creative cylinders at a point, or, you know, at that period, in a way that I think may just be fiscally irresponsible for most companies. I mean, for most publishers would not like give AM2 the kind of budget it gave to make Shenmue 1 and 2, right? And you know, I think Sega felt that they were in a position that they need, that innovation was their core competency. That was like their best hope for differentiating themselves from the stuff Nintendo was making and that was being popularized on PlayStation. You know, they were kind of doubling down on that, just, you know, risk taking. And so really I really do think like it's that forward thinkingness that's the essence of Dreamcast games for me. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that extends beyond just the Dreamcast itself, thankfully.
Yeah, there was a lot of mud thrown at walls that stuck very well. Like you say, it's and the thing is, I think a lot of like games now that do things that we take for granted, you know, maybe there's some kind of root there in a Sega game that was, you know, almost an experiment for the time, I suppose. Yeah.
Just, I agree. I think coming from a slightly different angle, I think the Dreamcast for me was the last console that didn't really go to all lengths to make games look realistic and feel realistic in a good way. I think if you look back at, and I'm not sort of suggesting every single PS2 game or PS3 game or 360 game is like this, but I think if you look back at those consoles, there was this ever increasing demand to try and make games look as realistic as possible, and they just looked a bit more dull and drab compared to what Dreamcast games used to look like. And you can pretty much pick any game from the library and it's colorful, it's vibrant, and it's got that kind of late 90s arcade feel about almost every game that you play on the console. And I think in our pursuit for making games feel and look more realistic, I think we lost that on the way.
Yeah, there's this definitely a kind of like abstractness to most Dreamcast. Well, not most, but a lot of first-party Dreamcast games, especially. You know, things like Space Channel 5 and Jet Set Radio. Like, to look at them, they just look bizarre. You know, if you've got no frame of reference, you know, show that somebody's never seen a Dreamcast game before, say, look at that, describe it to me. It's like bold character design, just a bit weird, and that's kind of, again, that's kind of what the Dreamcast library or the first party library means to me. It's weird abstractness and just a bit boundary pushing, certainly at that time.
Yeah, 100%. So we have one more message. It's not really a question, but I thought we'd best read it out because it's from our friend John Lee. who runs the Dreamcast Junkyard Facebook page, the Facebook group, the infamous, notorious Facebook group. And John's only goal apparently is to have a god level beard like Mike.
Yeah, he's getting there himself. To be fair,
pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah, moustache, still twirling moustache. The old Victorian gentleman criminal.
Yeah, he always struck me as being a very cool kind of like steampunk villain.
Yeah.
Which is kind of what he's actually kind of embodied and taken it to new levels, you know, especially with like banning people for talking about Dreamcast 2 and that kind of stuff. So if you listen to this, John, fair play.
Yeah, we just recorded our 15th anniversary Saturn Junkyard podcast commemorating that, and we had John on for it. And the one thing I'm kicking myself now is not asking him how many people he thinks he's banned for mentioning the Dreamcast 2 on the Facebook group.
Right, I suppose it's time for the voice clips. So the first one is from someone called James Harvey, and he has this message.
Oh, hi, yeah. I just want to say that the PlayStation 2 is the best console ever. Thanks, bye.
Wow,
you can't put my testing message in.
That sounds like a really fake Welsh accent. That's weird.
That'll destroy my integrity.
Oh, Tom, if you weren't sure about kicking him out before, I think it should be now.
All right, so the real first message we got was from Derek Pascarella, who is obviously a friend, and he's been on the podcast before. He is obviously hacker translator extraordinaire in the community, brought a lot of game translations to us this year, and he has a very nice message for us, which I'll just proceed to play now.
Dreamcast Junkyard, it's Derek Pascarella here, otherwise known as A-Team. Congratulations on the big 100. Very proud of you guys, and you've been a staple in my life for many, many years. Hate to think of what the Dreamcast scene would be like without you. And thanks to people like you and all the rest of us who are obsessed with Sega's swan song console, the dream truly never dies. Until next time, everybody, take care. Oh, and remember, give Lewis a raise. Come on, what are you doing? Congrats, guys. Keep it up.
Yeah, so you didn't tell him to say that at the end, Lewis, no?
No, that was completely all him, yeah. Derek also, he was like, I want to ask a question as well, so let me just play his question as well.
Oh, I almost forgot. A question for you guys. What is your favorite licensed, authorized, or otherwise accessory or peripheral for the Dreamcast? I would say, as odd as it sounds, mine would have to be the Dreamcast VCD MP3 player called Dream Movie. So this isn't the old version with the choppy frame rate and the out-of-sync audio. This is a very nice Windows CE-based edition. It uses Windows CE MPEG-1 libraries for the video playback because, you know, fitting in line with a guy like me who's stuck in the past, I have a huge 300 or so VCD film collection that I still watch to this day. So to bring those two loves together, the Dreamcast and my VCD collection, is really something special. Anyway, I look forward to hearing the answer. Take care, guys, and thanks for the great, great show.
Wow. Thank you, Derek, for that amazing question and message. You know, obviously we know who Derek is. He's a large part of the translation community within Dreamcast community. So yeah, and it was great podcast as well that he was on a few episodes back. To answer the question, I think my favorite sort of add-on or peripheral for the Dreamcast, it would have to be the karaoke unit. Even though it's completely useless in the year of our Lord 2021, it just looks so cool. It just has this kind of 64DD style vibe to it, and it just makes the Dreamcast look even more beefier and more mean than it already does, you know. So yeah, that'd be my choice. Again, completely useless, paperweight, but looks really cool.
You know, I'm going to get in here early before someone else says my answer, but I'm going to go for the fishing rod because I'd never seen a console with anything like that when Sega Bass Fishing first came out. And I remember that was something that like people from school actually wanted to come around to mine and play and stuff. Just so different, so weird, so Sega. I mean, I still love that to this day. I've actually got two that are still working and about 4 that broke. So yeah, definitely the fishing rod for me.
Do you know what you should do, Mark? Is you should like get a broom handle and like sellotape 2 fishing rods, one to each end, and then you can actually play as Killick and like move your stick around.
That's scrub. Killick.
Oh, Killick's my main, mate. Killick is my main because he's so cheap, just like mash buttons.
Well, I'll tell you what. Yeah, my girlfriend beat myself and every single one of my friends with Killick on her first try on Soul Calibur, which tells you everything you need to know. I hate that guy.
Mine would actually be the fishing rod as well. I mean, obviously, I've got love for the arcade stick, very lovely. But I just have a fondness for the fishing rod, and it always just comes back to this one memory of me walking into my friend's house, the only guy I knew had a Dreamcast, and he's like playing Sega Bass Fishing, and I'm like, what's going on here? And he's just like, oh my god, and he's like reeling this bloody random thing like a maniac trying to reel in a fish. And I'm just like watching this in complete awe, like what the hell is going on? Like what is this? And he catches a fish and I'm like, what? Like, you know what I mean? It's just what a baffling concept to, I mean, obviously now we take stuff like this for granted, but I was there like, what is this? Like, there's a fishing rod on what? Like,
I've got to say, like, you've never felt excitement like just hearing the words "fish on" and then like the controller just starts going fucking crazy.
Yeah,
like, the vibration's so hard. He's like, fucking hell. Sorry.
Letting the line out and then pull it back in again, letting it out again. It's like it teaches you the concepts of actual real fishing. Like, what's going on?
It's amazing.
Speaking of taking for granted, I think for me the answer is the VMU. I think it's we just came to accept it as just, you know, that's just what the Dreamcast does. But actually, you know, it was so revolutionary, really. I mean, you know, it didn't get used to the fullest of its potential for sure. But actually, you know, this little device that you could not only take out and play some crappy little games on, but, you know, and again, this was at the time where things like Tamagotchis were still pretty popular. But just being able to have that little screen on, you know, on your controller in front of you, which, you know, again, wasn't used particularly well in 90% of games, but the games it did work really well in, you know, utilized it really well. I think we've mentioned Resident Evil before, using your life gauge on this. You didn't have to keep going into your menu to see it. A lot of the NFL, American football games would have kind of the play selection grid on there, so your opponent sat next to you couldn't see what plays you were selecting. And it was just a cool looking little thing. I remember being dead jealous of the Japanese community who got hold of you know, the Godzilla VMU before the console even launched. I thought that was like the coolest thing ever. The fact you could buy this VMU and use it and play on it for the Dreamcast before the Dreamcast ever actually came out. I just thought that was phenomenal. And you know, they're not perfect by any stretch. There was so many flaws on there that never got fixed, no least of which this noise every time you turned your console on. But great little device. And yeah, I think most Dreamcast users back then and now, it's just one of those things you just take for granted because it's just, you know, it is what it is.
There it is.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, no, totally agree. The one thing about the VMU that really kind of not killed it, but the thing that stops it from becoming the thing that it should have been is the battery life. If it had a decent battery in it, it could have been used as a, you know, like almost like a Tamagotchi type thing. Do you know what I mean? But obviously it's power hungry because of what it is. Yeah, if it had a better battery, I think it would have been better received as a standalone thing as opposed to just a memory card.
One thing I think, you know, speaking from my own experiences, I kind of neglect the VMU. It just sits there. It just has memory on it. I save things, and I don't often actually really use it for, you know, its portable purpose. And it's just like, you know, when I was writing a piece for Andrew's Dreamcast Year 2 book, I learned after playing Power Stone 2 for many, many years that you can use the VMU to basically set like weapons you like to drop onto the field in a match, and it appears as like a 3D VMU on the field. And it's like, I never knew this, but you know, there it is. The VMU has all these like little things that you can tinker around and use, and you know, we kind of just shove it in the controller and save stuff. You know,
it's like the unsung hero of the Dreamcast, really, isn't it? The VMU. Didn't somebody release a 3D engine for it a few years back, so you could like have like a first-person shooter type game on the VMU? I saw that a few years ago. Just amazing, really. Obviously, it's not a very powerful little thing, but for what it is, you can do amazing things with it. And yeah, it was criminally underused, I think.
Really pleasing design as well. I think the VMU. It just it looks nice. It's something that looks really. I guess it would have, as I said, it would have fitted in really well back in the day because you had plenty of similar LCD type handhelds, that were out there. And I just love the idea of being able to kind of connect two together in school or whatever, and sort of play games against each other or trade your VMU files or whatever. And it was the games actually, like when we did the retrospective for Sega GT, it was being able to kind of take the game away with you and earn credits on the VMU by playing the mini games, and then when you get back home, plug it back in, and in theory you'd have all these new credits to go and buy cars. But again, as you say, Tom, it was massively hampered by the fact that realistically it was nobody could ever do that, because within a week of cracking open a new VMU, the batteries were dead. And the batteries was even back then was so expensive. It wasn't like getting a new AA or AAA or whatever. It was pretty. You had to go to a pretty specialist shop like a Tandy or something to get hold of the batteries that you needed. And I'd wager that the statistic of people that actually replaced batteries in their VMUs over the Dreamcast life would have been a very, very small percentage.
Yeah, minimal. Yeah,
that's true. Also, the dust caps, man, like it's so easy to lose. I'm sure so many people have lost the dust cap for that. VMU.
I've never seen one of them in real life ever. And I have quite a few VMUs.
It's one of the few reasons I wanted to invest in a 3D printer, because someone has actually, I think it might be PC actually, PC Wizard. I'm pretty sure somebody, and if it is PC, it's him, has actually put the template for a VMU dust cap on, so you can print your own now if you have a 3D printer.
Right.
Could a VMU dust cover count as an NFT if you printed one out? Is that how it works? Is that how it works, Lewis? You seem to be the expert on NFTs in the.
Oh no. Is it fungible? Because it needs to be non-fungible. James did mention PC Wizard 13, and we do have a message from him. So I'm just going to play it for you guys now.
Hey, I'm calling about the SegaNet offer. In the back of my NFL 2K1 manual, it says for a limited time, I can get 50 free hours on SegaNet. And hey, it says it's a limited time offer, so how could I possibly refuse, So no one's answering, and I got to get my 50 free hours so I can get my online football action on, So give me a call back when you can, and we'll work out this deal,
I didn't understand the word of that, Brian.
That's absolutely brilliant.
Can you translate?
That's great. I can't tell if it's a hybrid between a Brooklyn accent and a Chicago accent, but it works. It works very well.
I don't think there wasn't really a question there, was there? It was just kind of a.
That was brilliant.
Just a man ranting on a voicemail. Yeah.
I'd like to imagine him in a string vest, like doing that.
Yeah. For the peripheral thing, I think you're all right. The VMU is probably the correct answer if there's a one correct answer. And that also reminds me of the play calling that you can do on the on NFL 2K, where you can just pick your plays without the person you're playing with seeing next to you. So that's kind of cool. Yeah. There's also the maracas, right?
Yeah, that's my choice. Those things were like the centerpiece of the Dreamcast for me when I was at university, because everybody saw the maracas and everybody wanted to play Samba de Migo. It was just like the party game. Everybody wanted it. So that was like, that made me the cool kid in university for a while, because everyone wanted to go on the Samba de Migo game. But yeah, they're awesome. Like, I had never seen anything like them, and it's just an excellent peripheral and much better than a dance mat, because I was not a dancer, but I could shake maracas, and that was fun.
Yeah, I mean, the technology itself has aged probably worse than most peripherals on the Dreamcast, but it is one that just like you, Andrew, I mean, I feel like our sentimental like connection to it is in the memories that we got from playing Samba de Amigo with friends, and I routinely, at least, I mean, during the pandemic, maybe less often, but I'll have some of my like friends who aren't really into video games, they'll come over, and we'll all play. Like, they love playing Samba de Amigo, and so just the memories that we've amassed of us yelling pose, and then getting collectively frustrated when it doesn't read the inputs the way everybody thinks it should, and like the height levels not quite, like I feel like most of us are like right in between the set height levels for it to read correctly, and it's just like all these things that are just kind of charming in their quirks, and I love it even more for that. So, but yeah, even today I like just love breaking those out, and it's always a good time.
Yeah, it is charming in how kind of antiquated it is with modern eyes, because it doesn't actually use the actual physical maracas that you've got in your hands. It uses a sensor which is on the wire, which is then read by the sensor bar underneath it to dictate how high you've got your arms. So just like with the Wii controller, you can actually manipulate it. If you just want to stand there and just like move the maracas up and down to the right height, then it will think you've got them in the right positions. And it's just like, well, that obviously defeats the object completely. If you go into playing Samba de Amigo with the maracas with a modern head on, you kind of realize that it's actually quite an antiquated technology. But as you say, Brian, it is the quirk of it and the weirdly sort of outmodedness of it that is actually quite alluring, I suppose.
Yeah, and all the great times we've had with friends along the way.
Indeed, indeed.
So we have Patrick Trano from Sega Saturn Shiro, so he's left us a message.
Hey guys, this is Patrick from the Sega Saturn Shiro podcast and the Shiro Show. Wanted to congratulate you guys on 100 amazing episodes. I've been listening from day one, and I was inspired to create our own podcast thanks in part to you guys. If I'd have a favorite moment, it'd probably be the episode when that guy from Australia bought a rare Mist Laser active disc and talked about how he spent a fortune getting it imported. Now that's true dedication to preservation right there. I mean, dang, that was a lot of money. But anyways, thanks again, guys. Much love from everyone at Shiro.
Thank you very much, and obviously the love is reciprocal. We do spend a lot of time on the internet, and we know quite a lot of people in the rest of the community who do their own thing, their own podcasts and whatnot. And Shiro is another podcast and another community and another site that is well respected, not just by us, but obviously by a lot of people in the community. So thank you, Patrick.
So next we've got a very active member of our Discord, and that is Pizza Hotline. And so here he is.
Hey, it's Pizza Hotline here. I'm a big fan of the Junkyard and DreamPod. I bought a broken Dreamcast with no nostalgia or memories for the console in 2019 to learn electronics, to repair it and mod it, and it's since become my favorite console. Not just because of the amazing games, but also because of the bustling community around it and all the lovely people involved, and not to mention the Junkyard and DreamPod. I just wanted to leave a message to say thanks to Tom and all of the Junkyard staff for their such hard work over the years, writing amazing articles and making amazing DreamPod episodes. And long may it continue. A favourite episode that comes to mind of the DreamPod is DreamPod episode 21, with Caleb's amazing Santa Claus impression. And on that note, I'd love to see more of the older hosts making appearances like Aaron, Rob, Caleb, and Scott. But yeah, thank you so much. And here's to another 100.
Oh, that's a nice.
Well, yeah, thank you, Pizza Hotline. And as I said earlier on in the pod, the other guys, they're still around. They're welcome back on the podcast anytime. Caleb, as I said earlier on, with his amazing Jesse Ventura impression, and also his Santa. I can remember recording that. I sent him the script, and he was like, "Wait, what? You want me to read this on the pod?" I was like, "Yeah, just do it as if you're Santa Claus." And it was just a bit of a weird one. God, that's so long ago now. That must be like 2017 or something. Yeah, and we had the image for the podcast was the picture of Santa Claus from Blue Stinger on the big advertising board, for the DLC for Blue Stinger. God, yeah, it seems like a lifetime ago now. But thank you, Pizza Hotline. Thank you, everybody in the Discord as well who, chats and interacts with us and each other. It's a great community.
I think it's pretty awesome in his message how he mentions that he started getting into the Dreamcast in 2019 with no nostalgia, yet he's listened to all of the DreamPods. So that's awesome. Like, you know, like a lot of people would think it's nostalgia that is the reason why we're here. But there you go. There's an example of someone who literally had never played it before and loves it. It's his favorite console. So that's like, there's hope yet for the white box.
Here's a question for you guys. Do any of you like listen back to a podcast that you've been on? And the reason I ask that is because other than when I used to edit it, and obviously when Lewis releases the new versions now, I listen back to them, but I've never really been back and listened to the archive. And one of the main reasons for that is that I can't stand the sound of my own voice, like a lot of people. So I'm just like, yeah, I've not really been back. But when people bring things like that up, it's like, it's really kind of, the nostalgia just comes flooding back about the time we did that. And like when we used to do the podcast with Scott, who was in Australia, it was, you know, we'd have to like arrange it so that we were recording at like 3 a.m. because of the time difference. And like you'd have people on 4 different continents all getting together to record a podcast about the Dreamcast. And it's just like, God, we did that. And obviously we've, you know, most of us here now are in the UK, but obviously Brian's over in the States. But it's just really cool how we all came together from around the world to do this. Do you know what I mean? And make it work. So yeah, I'm just having a bit of a nostalgia trip there. Sorry.
Okay, another one from a member of our Discord. This is one from Lawrence Goodchild, aka Lozdude. That's who he goes by in our Discord. So I'll just play that now.
Congrats on reaching the big 100 Junkyard team. I think all of you should crack a beer open and enjoy this moment. My favourite parts of the podcast are definitely when there are simmering differences of opinion over various Dreamcast-related matters, like with Shenmue, for example. So my question is, if the Junkyard team were to have an acrimonious split before you reach podcast number 200, what Dreamcast-related issue would it be over? Cheers.
Such a good question.
I was going to say it would be over James continuing to do this fake Welsh accent and also trolling us by pretending he actually likes Spirit of Speed 937.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No, because that's not going to cause any upset though. I think if anything, I'm encouraging more people to play.
To be fair, if you listen to the most recent Dreamcast years, James won a little bit of, you know, Spirit of Speed kudos with me. Yeah, he's got it okay for a little bit.
I'm trying to think of anything that's really like divisive in the group, like Dreamcast related, but
Shenmue.
I think the example you gave, Shenmue, probably is the closest you'll get. Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of people that love the game and quite a lot of people that really don't.
It's going to be something else. We can't fall out over the Dreamcast because we just love it too much mutually. So
you say that, who was slugging off Sonic Adventure the other time?
It is junk, to be fair.
Oh man, here we go. See what I mean?
That's it. There we go. There's Lawrence's question answered. Okay, so we've got a message from a guy called Jacob. His message didn't necessarily include anything about episode 100 or like a memory or a question. He just kind of told us why he loves the music on the Dreamcast, and I suppose it's something that we can all agree on, so I'll just play that one now.
My favorite thing about Dreamcast was the focus on great music. You got such great games like Jet Set Radio or Rez that really incorporated music into the atmosphere of the games. And of course, there's fantastic rhythm games as well. Space Channel 5, what a great series, and Samba de Amigo, so much fun.
That's it. There we go. There he is.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that sort of outpouring of your thoughts. Very much appreciated. What I will say though is that the best. I know I've said this before, and we went over this before on the Headhunter episode, but Jack's theme from Headhunter by Richard Jacks is the best thing orally on the Dreamcast. That's just my opinion.
Side-eye emoji. But I mean, there's so much though, right? Like there's so many great pieces of music and games, like you said, games that kind of revolve around music. I don't know. I'd find it hard to choose one particular thing because it's just so much.
For me, I think it's probably City Escape. That song just makes me happy.
Yeah, that's a good shout. Yeah,
so good. Like, I mean, I literally just play that probably once a week. It's just my kind of go-to feel-good song. Such a good song.
Can I retract my previous comment? Just because I'm now thinking about all the other great tracks from different games. Even like the Shenmue main theme is like really cool.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, and that's the most positive thing I want to say about Shenmue on this podcast. So yeah,
love the Shenmue music, but I'd also give props to D2's music, and probably Jet Set Radio is probably the best music. You know, it's a game that focuses on everything to do with hip hop. It's not like some kind of game trying to be cool and hip. It like actually is hip and cool. So, you know, I love what Hideki Naganuma did with that soundtrack. It's just amazing.
Oh yeah, he's a legend, isn't he? Naganuma, obviously in gaming in general, but also on the Dreamcast. I also want to give a special shout out to the first stage of Stormwind. That is just amazing. That soundtrack is what an introduction to a game.
Okay, so this is from Daniel, who is with Wave Game Studios, who Tom recently interviewed on the blog. So go check that out. Obviously, publishers of Intrepid Izzy, Yeah Beavis 2 is coming as well. And this is Daniel's message.
Greetings, Junkyard. This is Daniel from Wave Game Studios here. Just wanted to say, keep up the good work. I've been reading the website for over 10 years now, and I've been listening to the podcast for probably 2 or 3 years, and I'm loving it. Thank you very much for the awesome review of Intrepid Izzy, and hopefully some of our upcoming titles are equally as well received. Just wanted to encourage you, keep going, keep doing what you're doing. We absolutely love it. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Nice.
Great message, thank you. Yeah, just as you alluded to there, Lewis, we did do an interview with them a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, what they're doing for the community is great. You know, I'm aware that there's other publishers doing stuff for the Dreamcast, but what Wave are trying to do is kind of almost make it like mainstream that there are games coming for the Dreamcast, and they want to put physical games out and put them on shelves. And as alluded to again in the interview, they really promoted Intrepid Izzy as a new game for the Dreamcast, and they literally drove to different retro gaming shops around the UK to like physically give copies of the game to put on display. You know, this is a new Dreamcast game in the year 2021 that you can buy physically, and that was amazing. So they're doing great things, and again, they are going to be publishing more stuff in 2022. So yeah, I mean, the future is bright for the Dreamcast, and it's because of publishers like Wave Game Studios, and obviously all the amazing indie devs that it is so bright. So yeah, great things to come, I think. Okay, well, that's kind of brought it to a natural end then, I suppose. It's been really cool reminiscing and listening to the questions from the listeners, both on social media and via voicemail. I'm going to get a bit soppy now, but, you know, without you, the listeners, we wouldn't do this. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for sticking with us throughout the 100 episodes or so that we've done so far. I also want to say thank you to all of our hosts, both past and present, because I couldn't do this on my own. Nobody wants to hear me talk for hours. I don't want to hear myself talk for hours. So yeah, it's really cool that we've kind of built this community up, and it's not just about us, it's about you as well that listen and take the time to download and interact with us across our different channels. So yeah, I mean, I never thought that when we first pressed recording on that first episode 0 way back in 2015, was it 16, something like that, that we'd be here with a whole new crew. Some people have, come and gone, but, I've made so many new friends through this podcast, through this community, and it's just a really nice place to be, to be honest. And so, yeah, I don't know how many times I can say thank you, but thank you for listening. Thank you to, again, you guys on the pod. Thank you to Peter Moore for allowing us to chat with him earlier on in this episode. And yeah, I suppose the only thing to say is that here's to another 100 episodes if we make it that far. Unless hell freezes over or the earth explodes, then we'll still be here in another 5 years' time. I mean, it makes me wonder if we'll be usurped by younger models of ourselves. You know what I mean? That have got a new perspective on the Dreamcast, that kind of thing. But just from me again, it's a really heartfelt thank you, and yeah, it's been one hell of a ride and continues to be so. So yeah, this is episode 100, and we'll see you on episode 101. But for now, It's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from all of them. Shall we say goodbye individually, everybody? Lewis, you go first.
Yeah, goodbye individually. I'm not going to make that joke. That's for Mike. Yeah, see you later, everyone. And obviously, it's been a pleasure being part of the DreamPod as always. I don't think I ever saw in my life the idea of me being on a podcast. You know, it's like not something I ever thought I'd do regularly, but here I am. So, you know, happy 100 to the DreamPod.
Who's next? Andrew.
Oh, it's me. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. I honestly didn't think that I would be a part of the DreamPod, you know, or the Dreamcast community, and it's been a hell of a ride. I'm really happy to be here, and yeah, here's to another 100, as you've said, and I'll do my host duties and say, please do go to buymeacoffee.com/DC Junkyard and buy us a VMU battery, and go to the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk and read all of our articles. It's another 100.
I think that's also how Lewis gets that raise too. So
yes, he does. Yeah, that is correct.
So I will just continue to go around. So everyone who wants to say something, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, you know, just similar to the guys, really. I mean, I was listening to the DreamPod from, I think I started on like episode 4 or 5, Tom. So, you know, I mean, I was a long time listener before I ever envisaged being involved. And obviously to be on episode 100 is kind of crazy to me. Obviously, thank you so much, mate, for even having me on. So love being part of the team. This is a big part of my life nowadays. And yeah, similar to everyone else, just thank you for everyone who listens. Thank you to everyone on the team who's kind of, you know, been so accommodating, been so lovely. Yeah, it's a pleasure. So yeah, thank you.
Cool, mate. Nice one. Brian.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've been kind of a bit player in all this, and you know, showing up every now and then for episodes here and there, and the book club that Kev runs. Oh, shout out to Kev Mason as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I just want to thank you all for letting me be part of the community, and I really appreciate the. I don't know how else to put it other than just like the enthusiasm and maybe lack of cynicism that the Junkyard has kind of been built on, and that is all just incredibly palpable with all of the work that you've been doing for these years, Tom, and everybody else. I just really I just appreciate that there's a corner of the web like this, or the retro game community that is just, I don't know, enthusiastic and well-to-do as the Saturn or the Dreamcast Junkyard, and then also the Saturn Junkyard. We've been doing that, and that was only possible because of the achievements that you all had set out.
Cool, thanks, Brian. I will say as well, you know, your even though you say that your appearances on the podcast have been fleeting, but your articles on the blog have been amazing. So thank you for that. I will say I'm going to come to you next, Mike, my partner in crime for a lot of this. I'm the the author of the amazing Collector's Guide as well. So yeah, the floor is yours.
Yeah. So I think episode 0 I was given a shout out. It was a few weeks after me and Tom had discussed the first guide. And so here we are, 7 years later now?
Yeah.
Been on quite a few episodes, quite a few weird experiences with Junkyard, obviously from doing a podcast in the outdoors in Bristol next to a train, which made lots of noise. And obviously the panel where we were on as well, which was a weird experience. Junkyard's been great last 6-7 years. The list of things and podcasts that we've done have been strange and slightly chaotic episodes, like the shoot 'em up episode that we did, which was possibly the moment where Tom realised things were out of hand, because it was just absolute chaos with 20 people trying to, however there was. It felt like 20 people on there, to be honest with you. But I hope we go on for many years, and hopefully I'll actually have the book out at some point next year.
Yeah, we'll be talking about the book coming out soon on episode 200, hopefully.
Yeah, I hope not.
Brilliant. Cheers, Mike. And last and least, it's Mr. James
I was
Harvey.
waiting for it the whole time. Yeah, so like everyone else has said, it really is a pleasure to be involved. As everyone knows, I was a huge fan of the Dreamcast back in the day, and was very very much a fan of the Dreamcast from the day it got discontinued onwards, and I discovered the Junkyard blog pretty early days and kind of followed the content for many years, and loved it until I decided to reach out to you, Tom, via email probably 4 or 5 years ago now, just to kind of say, because I'd done a bit of reviewing and a bit of content creation up to that point, just to sort of say, hey, would love to offer my services should they be required. And I joke about this all the time, but because I'd listened to the Junkyard podcast and watched your content, Tom, on YouTube and stuff beforehand, it did feel really surreal. It was a little bit starstruck in a weird way speaking to you for the first time. I'd listened to your content for probably close to a decade up to that point. So it was like, it was Tom, I knew you and you didn't know me, sort of thing. So it was just weird to speak to you the first time. But yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I really enjoy speaking to everyone. I think the fact that we've all got such different opinions on things is, both from a written sense and also from a podcast perspective, just, adds so much variety and diversity to the sort of material that we're able to produce, and it genuinely is an honor to be part of that. And yeah, hopefully we'll continue, as everyone has said, long into the future.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, cool. Thank you. Well, thank you guys. That's amazing to listen to, and yeah, again, I'm very thankful that we've done this. And massive thanks to everybody in the community, DC Talk, people like Adam Koralik, PC Wizard, all the indie devs, amazing stuff. But I think we'll leave it there for now, and we'll sign off. Thank you very much for listening. Please continue to listen for our next 100 episodes, and I'm sure we'll do something similar at episode 200. But for now, that's us. You can follow us on Twitter at the DC Junkyard. You can find our blog at the dreamcastjunkyard.co.uk. Join our Discord if you like. You can find us on YouTube. Just type Dreamcast Junkyard into Google, you'll find us. And that will do for this episode. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye.
Please stop this disc now.